Welcome everybody to Digitas LBI. I'm Lorenzo Wood, I'm the Chief Innovation Officer, and as somebody pointed out, one of the founders, one of the founder. In the 26 years since we founded this business, whose job is to lead clients through the ever-developing world of digital communications. In the last decade or so in particular, it's become very clear that with the reach and the depth and the transparency of digital communications and what it's brought to the world, that our clients, we have a responsibility and they have a responsibility because they can have such an impact on people's behaviour in ways that before, perhaps 10 years ago, was impossible. And more of our clients, I'm glad to say, are coming to realise that good work is actually good business for them. And that's why we've been very pleased to support Rachel and Ned and the Koreo team with various events over the last couple of years. And this evening, you're all here to join them as they launch Koreo Futures, their new initiative. So without further ado, over to you, Ned. Thank you very much.
Can everyone hear me on this lapel mic? I sound a little bit boomy, but can everyone hear me? Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Lorenzo. Thank you very much for having us again. It's really wonderful to be back in this room. As Lorenzo said, my name is Ned. I'm Deputy Director at Koreo, and it's my huge pleasure to welcome you here this evening. Really nice to have you all here. And particularly, I wanted to welcome you to this part of the evening. Very impressed that we managed to overwhelm the robot earlier, apparently. It literally needed to take a time out, which I think is pretty extraordinary. Didn't know that's something that robots had to do. First thing you'll notice about this stage is that we're a little bit light on our speakers, our contributors. So the bad news is that we've lost two, one to industrial action and one to snow in Belgrade, which sounds like something out of a Graham Greene novel or something. But the good news is that we have two panelists here ready and willing to not only confidently but accurately predict the future for you this evening, which is a real thrill. I plan to speak as little as possible over the next hour or so. But before I introduce the people who will be doing the talking, I want to give a quick overview of Koreo Futures and how this evening fits into that project. As most of you will know, we're a talent consultancy dedicated to social impact, and we've decided to spend some time at the beginning of 2018 thinking about the future of good work, which for us means a mixture of two things really. Firstly, exploring how the future of work might affect the causes and communities that we care about, and secondly, how work which seeks to serve those communities might change. We're going to look at a range of trends through the project and pull them together into a series of publications, some early examples of which are on the postcards that are on your seats. So we're going to ask whether the combination of demographic shifts and artificial intelligence will lead to a change in the status of care work, how campaigners will have to respond to new and opaque power structures, how social impact organisations might respond to more flexible workforces, and how well-being at work will change management in a generation with less stigma around mental health. Tonight, however, we're focusing on issues around new technologies, specifically artificial intelligence, with a particular eye on poverty, ageing and gender inequality. And to that end, I'm really pleased to welcome our panellists who are really could not be better placed to bring some of these threads together for us this evening. So please welcome me in joining Campbell Robb and Brittany Smith. So Campbell, who many of you will know, is the Chief Executive of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation and the Joseph Rowntree Housing Trust. He joined JRF at the beginning of last year, having previously been Chief Executive Shelter, and was previously the First Director General of the Office of the Third Sector. Brittany is a Senior Policy Analyst at DeepMind, where she works in the Ethics and Society team, focusing on the social effects and ethical challenges surrounding artificial intelligence. Just before we hear from them with their introductory comments, I want to mention quickly about the two panellists who aren't in the room. Firstly, Indy Johar, who has got stuck on the way to the airport in Belgrade, and then his flight was cancelled, so he can't be with us. He has sent us a video, which kind of looks a bit like a hostage video, but it is very interesting. A very interesting hostage video, and probably one of the more hopeful hostage videos you'll see. I'm going to play that at the end of our panel discussion. And secondly, I want to mention Dr. Lydia Hayes, who unfortunately couldn't be with us because of industrial action at her university. Lydia's work explores how working class women employed in care settings are institutionally humiliated by the gender inadequacy of labour law, and as such speaks to the provocation we were originally planning on talking about in some depth tonight, which was that in a world of uneven automation, a rapidly ageing population and a crisis in social care, the status of care in this profession will need to rise dramatically in the next 20 years. In Lydia's absence, we probably won't talk about caring as specifically or as much, but it remains a really important part of the context, and I massively recommend her book, Stories of Care, A Labour of Law. Okay, I've asked each panellist to give a short introduction to themselves, their work, and any opening thoughts about the topic, and then we'll follow up, and I'll open the questions up to the floor as early as possible, so be thinking right from the first minute, if you may. Start with Campbell and then go across to Brittany, if that's okay.
Great, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. That introduction doesn't really do justice, so I thought I would start by talking a little bit about me, my first job, what I know best. I started work, my first job was when I was 13, cutting grass. My worst job was working in a poultry factory chicken farm for 98 pence an hour. My best job was a tree surgeon's assistant for a year in New Zealand, hanging off trees, cutting things down. My best and worst boss was David Blunkett. My organisation is also quite complicated. I work for a foundation that's over 100 years old. It was founded by a businessman who made his money out of sweets, but was a Quaker, who became a philanthropist, who set up a foundation whose money is dependent on the stock exchange to continue its fight against poverty. But we're also our housing association with over 2,500 homes. We run care homes, look after thousands of people, and employ hundreds of people. So I don't know whether that gives me any knowledge or expertise to talk about work, but at least it tells you a little bit about me. So where do we start with the future of work? Well, you should always start at the future where we are right now. And where we are right now is in quite an interesting and challenging place about work, because all of the stories that we have been told for generations about work no longer work. Because you were told, you work hard, you get on. It's not true. If you start in a low-paid job now, you are likely to be in a low-paid job in 10 years' time. The best way out of poverty is work. Not true. It's probably the second or third job that now gets you out of poverty, not the first job. More people in work will mean less costs to the state. I'm coming in and out, I'm sorry, because I'm moving around, I apologise to you. More people in work will mean less cost to the state. In-work benefits are on the rise as work no longer covers the cost of people's living. Work hard at school or university and you will get on. True, if you go to the right school, go to the right university, have the right parents to help you to do those things. Work hard and you can buy a house and look after your family. If you're poor, if you're living in the southeast of London, you are having a laugh. So work is not all great. Work is poor. Work can be terrible. Work is not great. Many people doing many jobs in many industries, not getting on, not thinking that that's something that does for them. So when we talk about the future of work, we need to remember that work is already broken for lots and lots of people who might not get fixed by some of the things that we talk about today. I am slightly doom-monger. Put me in any room on any subject and I go, well, what about poor people? So please, bear with me, that's what you're going to get today. But, so, taking that all into consideration, what does that mean about the future of work, where we are now, what we could do about this? The first thing about the future of work is that much work won't change very much for a very long time. Small amounts of work will change rapidly and greatly for a small amount of people. It is highly unlikely if you are a barman or a barwoman working in a bar and somewhere in rural England that your job is going to change very much because of automation, because of technology, for quite a long time to come. Other parts of your life might change, parts of it might get better, parts of it might get worse, but some of those things won't change at all. In other parts of the workforce, in the retail workforce, you talk to big supermarkets, despite the best will in the world, they know that they will lose thousands of jobs in the coming years because just the way that we shop. Because we got more things delivered, we do more self-scanning, those jobs will go. No matter what they wanted to do as businesses, the types of jobs that they will have will change. So the future work is uneven as it has always been and always will. So one solution, one idea won't fix all things. I suppose the second thing about it then is we discuss the future of work and technology and AI and all of those things as if they are unstoppable forces for which we can do nothing about. So I am a believer, and others aren't, that that isn't necessarily true. We can take control of some of this, we can regulate it, we can manage it, we can think about what uses it has, we can set up it in a way that makes it something that we're in control of, not something that overwhelms us. Or if it is going to overwhelm us, we can plan for it. The age-old question of a changing workforce, how do you prepare a workforce? My defining memory of my youth is seeing pictures of miners 3 years after their mines have been closed down, being taught how to use word processors far too late for them to gain any skills or gain a foothold in the workplace. If technology is coming, if it's going to close things down, if it's going to change things, some of it will happen rapidly, most of it will happen slowly. So prepare for the future of work. Think about it now, make preparations for it. So I think that that's a real challenge for all of us in all of our works to be able to do that. In the concept of social care, which we also kind of bridge across, we run care homes. We use technology in care homes, but we use the technology in care homes to make it easier for our staff to spend more time to do the things that we want them to do, which is to spend more time with their clients, with their patients, talking to people, doing that extra time, using that as the absolute crux of what the technology is for. The technology can help us make sure that they're given the right meds at the right time to the right people, but it also should allow them to have more time with that people. All the studies that we saw many years ago about volunteering and the delivery of home meals. So people were always willing to have a slightly colder custard for 5 minutes more chat with someone who delivered the custard. So the technology should manage and be able to mix those two things together, because it doesn't, you get hot custard and sad people. And that is not the mix of the future of work that we want. That's just putting it out there. Hot custard is not important as it is for people. And then when we talk about automation, that deindustrialization, that change of workforce, that change of things that are happening has to be managed for those at the most vulnerable end of society. It is easy to sit in this beautiful room, in this great room with a bunch of people who are technologically savvy, able to manage their own kind of their identities online and in many, many ways. But you are not the norm. You may feel like the norm, but you're not the norm. You may also be the future of work, but you aren't the future of everybody's work. So we all have a responsibility in the organizations that we run, the businesses that we run, to absolutely and utterly think about the consequences of the technological decisions, the work decisions that we have to make every day. Because if we don't do that, it will run away from us as quickly, but it will run away from those who can't control it much, much faster. So I kind of want to just finish there, because my provocation is really that I haven't got a view of what the future will or won't be. I know what will happen, that the future of work has always been bad for people in poverty. The future of technology has generally been bad for people in poverty. And that we have a choice as we reach this very, very critical point in work and the way that our world operates, which is clearly at a turning point, that we will choose to control that or not control that, to give everybody the chance to use it and empower themselves with it or not. And I think that the future of work reminds me, and I don't really like doing this, but there is this fantastic quote from Winnie the Pooh, which is about how he's coming down the stairs, bump, 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 on the back of his head behind Chris Robin. It's, as far as he knows, the only way to come down the stairs. But only if he could stop bumping just for 1 minute, he might work out a different way to come down the stairs. The future of work is ours to control if we choose to do it, if we stop and think and prepare. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Campbell. Brittany?
Yeah,
Stand or sit, I'll keep it up to you.
Is that better? Okay, great. Hi, I'm Brittany, and I work on the Ethics and Society team at DeepMind. I've been at DeepMind for about a year. Before I joined DeepMind, I was on the public policy team. At Google, I was your friendly lobbyist who was trying to get Google out of trouble every time there was a terrorist attack or some kind of hate speech on the internet. It was a weird job. It was a really weird time. But yeah, basically, I spent a lot of time thinking about bad content and bad behavior online and the role of platforms in exacerbating some of what is the worst of us, and maybe not always the best of us. And so that has served me well in my transition over to DeepMind, thinking about these kinds of questions in the context of artificial intelligence. So I will say that I have more questions than answers on a lot of these topics, so please don't be surprised if I say I just don't know. I'll just tell you a little bit more about DeepMind and what we do. We are an artificial intelligence research company that's based here in London. We were acquired by Google in 2014, and our mission is to solve intelligence, which is to say that we want to recreate what it means to be intelligent and build general purpose learning systems, algorithms that can think for themselves. And we want to use that technology and use that knowledge to make the world a better place. And so we believe ultimately that with careful application, AI technology can help humanity solve some of our toughest challenges, like climate change and the universal provision of healthcare, and just generally speaking, pave the way for a better future. No big deal. We created DeepMind Ethics and Society because we believe AI can be an extraordinary benefit to the world, but only if it's held to the highest ethical standard. And we can't rely exclusively or reactively on someone else to tell us what that means, either theoretically or in practice. And we built this team because we know that new technology can be disruptive, and that even with uneven and hard to predict implications for differently affected groups, as scientists working in this area, we have a responsibility to support open research and investigation into the wider impact of our work. And we do that in order to secure its safety, its accountability, and its potential for social good. So there are a couple things driving the way that we structure our work and our thinking on economic and social impact. One of the most important, is that we believe that technology is not value neutral, and that as technologists, like I said, we have to take responsibility for the ethical and social implications of our work. And as a field, in a field as complex as AI, that's easier said than done, which is why we committed to deep research, academic, rigorous research on these ethical and social questions. And we've also committed to the inclusion of as many voices as possible in that work, and ongoing critical self-reflection about our role in all of this. My team, this Ethics and Society team, is a research unit within DeepMind that's dedicated to this task. We carry out interdisciplinary work together with the technical insight that the rest of DeepMind brings and the diverse range of people that can be affected by AI. So we start from the premise that AI should remain under meaningful human control and should be used for a socially beneficial purpose, which I should slow down maybe and just say again. We start from the premise in our work on economic and social impact that AI should remain under meaningful human control and be used for socially beneficial purposes. Now, what each part of that means, I think, is up for a lot of research and debate, but that is the sort of framework that we're working under. And so understanding what all of that means in practice requires a lot of rigorous scientific inquiry, which is what we're up for. And I think to be more explicit in that, we, for example, have structured the team by not hiring another person whose PhD is in artificial intelligence. The most recent hire that we made is an economist, which is not me. I'm not an economist, so please don't ask me your economic questions about labor markets. My background is in feminist theory. We hired an economist, someone whose PhD is in applied ethics, political philosophy. So if you study any of those things, holler at me later. Because we need more people who can study and write and publish peer-reviewed work at the intersection of AI and social science. Because a lot of these questions that I think people are going to ask me and that you have been asking of technologists and of academia and of government more generally, we just literally do not know the answers. And we need to take time to figure out what even are the questions that we want to ask of all of these various institutions that are involved in technological development. So anyway, what does all of this work that I just described look like in practice? We meant to have it published in time for this event, but we are publishing a paper on AI in the future of work, so I won't say too much more about that, but it will be a good example of the kind of rigorous scientific research that you'll see from us on some of these questions that actually lean more towards social science and the application of AI to society. And there are 6 other research themes that are guiding our thinking, and the one I'll talk the most about today, I think, is around privacy, transparency, and fairness. We're also just on the edge of announcing a lecture series on AI and ethics, and part of what is driving that work is that there just aren't enough events like this. When you come to events like this, you see how many people turn out to talk about something that you would presume to be like pretty niche and nerdy, and yet there are tons of people here who probably have never ever studied or written about AI at all, but see the relevance to their everyday lives, and that's part of what we want to make sure we're doing, is facilitating more space and more opportunity for people who are not technologists and people who do not work in this space to have the opportunity to come learn and to ask questions and to interrogate some of these topics that really genuinely should be up for public debate and not just the purview of a few people who work at a company that Google bought a couple years ago. We are also, so to be even more specific, I think, because I think it will help, one of the things that I'm working on mostly, almost all of our time, is focused on work that we want to do around AI and criminal justice. I had a group approach me a couple of months ago, and I was like, oh, like you guys are really cool, I want to figure out a way to support your work. They're like a human rights research group, and they were like, it would really help us if you would stop talking about AI all the time. Stop talking about how great it is and about how it can do everything all the time, and talk more about what this technology cannot do. And we wanted to sort of create more space and opportunity for a conversation on the limitations of this technology. And I don't necessarily mean in a technical sense, because it's becoming increasingly true that the technology can do anything when we ask it to, or that will become true maybe within the next decade. But we have to ask, should it? And do we want it to do that? And I think the application of, quite frankly, bad data science and bad ML and bad AI in the context of the criminal justice system is some of the scariest stuff that people have seen in a long time in relation to technology.
And that's primarily around bad data sets, isn't it?
Oh yeah, totally. Well, I mean, yes, it is like, well, this is exactly what I'm getting to, which is that we want to move away from conversations that say, oh, well, the use of machine learning in the criminal justice system is bad, toward conversations that are much more nuanced. Like, is it okay, like what are the social values driving the application of that technology in this context? And do we even want it to do that? And in the context in the US, for example, the criminal justice system is fundamentally racist, right? So that data will never not be biased. You can't build an application on top of that data and sell it to the government and then say, oh, well, we just built this like super efficient tool that can predict who is going to reoffend so that you can determine what their bail should be, and it's totally fine. That's literally impossible. Like, it's never not fine, because think about who is in jail in the first place. Think about how those people who are waiting or arraignment got arrested. It was because, or rather, I won't say probably, but in many places, an algorithm sent the police to that neighborhood in the first place. And so we are getting stuck, I think, in some ways of talking about these like problematic applications of AI that are disconnected from the broader social context. And so yes, that data is fundamentally biased, but the entire system that the data comes from is also a fundamentally racist one. And so, yeah, I think maybe I'll stop there, which, oh, I have one more thing to say, which is these questions around sort of regulation and mitigating bad impacts, I think are really, really important ones. And one of the things that we want to spend a lot more time researching within the next couple of months is about problematic applications of new technology. So it could be the case that when an automated decision has been made about you, to say that you can't have a loan to buy a house because for a reason you don't know, it might actually be the case that there's an existing civil rights law to help you there. You already shouldn't be discriminated against. The fact that it was an automated decision made about you by an algorithm being built by a creepy company who sold it to the government, and the government had no idea what it was doing. That's all fine and good, but there is a law who can potentially help you with that. And I think the ACLU in particular will do some really cool, by work on this, I mean notice of court, which is just going to be awesome to really test the boundaries and test the limits of the mechanisms that we already have in place to guide us and to protect us in relation to this new technology. So that will be a cool time. That's it.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I have to say that in preparing for this Q&A, in one of the challenges, which for actually to take it in rather than any lack of questions on that, those two introductions certainly haven't helped in that regard at all. I was kind of struck by something Campbell said, and I'll ask you both a sort of similar question, which was that if the future of work in technology has always been bad people in poverty, what's different about this time? Or do you think it will be different this time, and if so, why? And you were also talking about the main difference being in preparation. So one of the questions was, how well are we preparing? How's that preparation going? I think I have to ask you both to both those things.
I think it's also about the creation of technology as well, not just the preparation of the type of technology that you could use to disrupt existing monopolies or workforces. There is potential always to do that, as it is to disrupt perhaps the bias in the criminal justice system. So I think that we also need to be looking at technology and change for good as well as for bad. It's totally possible to do that. The application of we're already looking at how you disrupt sort of gas and electricity markets. They become much more manageable because you need much less. The technology is much easier to run meters and types of things. So how do you break up monopolies? So you can break up markets in different ways by investing in different types of businesses and using technology in different ways. That's the first thing. The second thing is I don't think we're preparing for it very well at all. But then I think that that's partly because we're all a little bit bumping down the head, just thinking this is just happening, it's happening, and nobody stops and says, well, actually, a bit like what Brittany's talking about, how do we stop, really think about what we wanted to do? What change do we want to see? What if we could use this technology or this thing to change society in a different way? What are those big things that we want to change? Do we want a criminal justice system that works a different way? Do we want a workforce that works in a different way? So I think we have to ask those questions. So I don't think we're very prepared, but then just to give you an example of that, the conversation is still owned by those who have got control. So all the discussion about a gig economy and lots of kind of older, secure people with housing saying, well, that's what young people want. They want to move around or all. No, they don't. They want what you've bloody got, and you don't want to give it up. And it's a bit like, oh, young people like renting because they like to move around. No, they don't. Renting's rubbish. It takes up too much. I think they want to buy a home like you. So I think part of the discussion about work is currently controlled by those who are secure at work and not controlled by those who are insecure at work. Now, if we can have technology and AI that helps to put those that are insecure at work more insecure at work, that's going to be a good thing. Now, I don't know enough about technology and what's coming to do that, but that's what we'd be arguing for.
Really, you do know enough about technology.
Well, I would say we're not prepared. Was the question whether or not we're prepared?
The question was twofold.
Okay.
If technology in the future of work and technology has always been bad for people in poverty, do you think this time will be different? And secondly, whatever that future, how well are we preparing for it?
Well,
I actually meant mostly in terms of people, actually, rather than technology. How well are we preparing people to respond to it?
oh, we're failing on both fronts, obviously,
Cool.
right? So we are not doing, and I would include myself in this, is why we care so much about figuring out what meaningful public engagement looks like. And I don't know how to do this at scale yet. If you have ideas, please. So we'll try this lecture series. We try doing citizen series with the RSA. People don't know enough about this technology, and they don't feel involved in the decision-making process about when it's applied to their lives. And I think it's urgent, and I think it's scary. And yeah, we're definitely not doing enough around that. And what the first part of the question again?
What do you think is different this time, basically?
Yeah, I think what's different this time is that it can be worse, right? But it doesn't have to be. People just have to genuinely care. And what I think I think what's driving my pessimism on that is that we've never ever done a good job of this. There's no reason why we should think that we will suddenly, because the technology is so much more powerful or more pervasive in society, we suddenly will figure out how to evenly distribute the benefit. Right? We've never actually done that ever in a way that is genuinely robust and genuinely fair. and genuinely transparent, we have to figure out what all of those things mean, like yesterday. And so, yeah, no, I pessimism on both fronts for now. Although I do think that there's like reason to be so optimistic, which is that one of the things that makes me the most optimistic about some of these topics is that the best, most interesting conversations are actually not being driven by industry; they're being driven by academia. And academics, I think, have done such an incredible, and civil society, I would say, have done such incredible jobs of bringing up some of these conversations, especially in relation to existing power structure and existing law. I keep coming back to this point about civil rights law because I just find it so compelling that while everyone is squirreling away on whether or not some new meta regulation is needed or some new meta government agency to look after AI, there's an Equal Opportunity Housing Act. Oh, I'm sorry, that's an American thing. That someone needs to take a case again underneath that piece of civil rights law and say an automated decision was made about me and denied me housing and it was discriminatory. And that could be so exciting. And a much more robust mechanism for recourse than sort of us drafting a new piece of regulation that will be impossible to enforce.
Both of you have kind of touched on power, and both of you have also touched on the fact this is happening already. It's not something that's 20, 30 years down the line. And I think one of the more immediate impacts of technology, artificial intelligence, automation, whatever, on working life is actually that it has increased surveillance of and manipulation of people who are already working, and to Campbell's point, it's often been on people in low-income roles. I suppose my question is that inevitable? And is it reinforcing a power dynamic that has been developing over centuries that is skewed fundamentally towards the employer? And if it's not inevitable, what can be done about it?
God, you don't ask easy questions, do you? So I think that there is a discourse that needs to be had, which we sort of had a work review which started to have that discourse, and it's sort of the discourse that is a cross between what kind of society, what kind of workplace, what kind of communities do we wish to create. The sort of, you just walk around London, you walk around here, and all you see is people with laptops in coffee shops, working either on their own, as part of a loose collective or something, or part of a bigger thing. That's an entirely different workplace to the one that I grew up in even 15, 20 years ago, which was all, people still spoke to their desks when I started working. The workplaces change all the time in lots of different ways. But so I think that we have to really have a much stronger view of what kind of communities and therefore what is the role of business in that. The easy answer to people being low paid is businesses should take less profit and they should pay more, but then they would argue that then prices will go up and therefore people will pay more. It is a complicated thing. It's not easy to fix lots of these things, but we need to have more of a conversation about work. Even the conversation in this country we've had for the last 30 years is about what we need to do is get to a level of full employment, and that will be our problem solved. We have got to virtually, as close as you can get, relatively speaking, not in every community there are still big pockets of unemployment, but generally speaking, relatively high employment levels. But yet we still have high levels of poverty, we still have people whose wages don't cover their costs. So we need a different discussion about what those big picture things are, and then what does that actually mean for people's lives. So I think the automation of technologies is terrifying in some ways. I was at Hamilton the other day. I strongly recommend it. Buy, steal your mother, sell her if you want a ticket. But the barman, I asked the barman for a drink, and I said, I'll have that one there. He says, I can't give you that one. That's hers. I can only give you drinks from the ones that I've been allocated because everything is measured. And I am recorded on everything, so there is no fraud. And there was a camera on the bar looking down on him serving those drinks in that way. Now that's just in one theatre. That's happening all over. That's having loads and loads of workplaces happening all the time and making that happen. Now that's
automation, everybody.
Indeed. Turn it on again. That's all I know. But that type of intrusion isn't about technology. That is partly about technology. That's partly about choice and trust, and the type of communities and workforces that we want to be.
And I think ultimately that's the choices. They are ultimately human choices. You could choose not to. You could choose to trust your barman, or you can trust not to choose your barman. You have the technology available to you these days to make sure that if you don't trust them, that you can monitor their every movement and everything they do. Is that the right thing to do or the wrong thing? I think it's the wrong thing, but that's the choices that we face as businesses and organisations.
One of the provocations that we'll hear from Indy when I play his video in a minute, which I'll paraphrase badly, is whether the real impact of technology is going to be to liberate us from essentially being bad robots for the last 50 years. So actually, what if we've been working as robots and need to be liberated from that experience? Anyway, he'll explain that one better than I have. Brittany.
I have a couple things. Hamilton also changed my life. There was a Brittany before Hamilton and a Brittany after Hamilton. It was incredible. And I've been.
I feel like we need to come back to that.
Yeah. I was thinking about what you said about choice, and in some ways, choice can be. It's complicated, right? Because we talk a lot in tech companies about like what does a meaningful choice for the user actually look like. And if you give the user a choice, sometimes users don't care. They just want you to do the right thing. And if you as a company aren't willing to do that right thing, then that choice that you have given the consumer isn't a meaningful one. And so, yeah, I think choice is a really, I would like to think a lot more about that. That could be a really interesting idea in this context. What I was going to say, generally, is that when I think about sort of like whether, when I think about some of these questions, like the one we just asked, I find them to be really, really compelling research questions actually. So there's one angle of this that is actually just there's a philosophical research question about AI and automation that's like, what is actually the relationship between human beings and their work? One that I think is changing fundamentally, and I think it's a really interesting philosophical question. And then there's like the purely economic empirical question about like, what is the number of jobs that will exist or not exist in the year 2050? I don't know, it's kind of stupid. And then there's another question about AI management, is what I would kind of call it, which is kind of what you're talking about. These questions around like the way that AI is used in relation to you and your work. Whether or not it's used to surveil you or to make decisions about whether or not you should be hired or fired or how you're evaluated and what kind of transparency mechanism exists for you as an employee in that, I think is a more urgent question than the one that I just mentioned about sort of like the meta relationship between you and your work. And then there are these questions that I think are also super cool about AI. I would maybe call them like AI mitigation research questions around inequality and redistributive social welfare. So these questions around universal basic income, universal basic provision, which are also economic questions, but they're going to be, it's such a cool time to be working in this space, and such a huge number of different kinds of ways that you can approach some of these questions around sort of what comfort level do we have with this, and is the introduction of some of this inevitable, and what is my relationship to it. So basically my answer to that is to offer up all kinds of research questions to ask in this space rather than how to answer them. But that's sort of like a loose framing that I think has been useful to me when I think about some of these things.
I wanted to just give the example of recruitment right now. My nephew is trying to, just graduated, got it first, did really, really well, and is trying to get on any number of sort of big company graduate programs, and literally doesn't speak to a person at any point during that process. He has a series of tests that he has to take. If he gets through those tests, he does an interview with an algorithm-driven kind of AI intelligence, which asks some questions, monitors his attitude, and kind of things. If he gets that, he goes to an assessment centre, which is all driven not by people and kind of things. And then at the end of it, he told that we had too many applicants who didn't get the job. So now, on one side, it's a hugely dehumanizing for him. He doesn't ever get any feedback. The feedback he gets is automated. On another side, you could argue that removes bias. You could be absolutely, he is white, middle class, privileged, and he's not getting jobs, and hopefully the algorithms and the AI is allowing people who aren't coming from that background in. But are they being used for good, or are they just being used to cut jobs in HR departments in big companies? Those are the types of questions that I think we really, and they're happening right now, and there's not really any control over them, but they're already existing in people's experience of work and technology is changing right now in people's lives.
Brittany, you look deep in thought. Do you want to say something about
Yeah, I
that?
was just going to say, this is related, but also a tangent in a different direction. One of the things I'm obsessed with right now is procurement standards. I'm so interested in procurement as a mechanism for supporting, I would say supporting as a generous framing, supporting government and law enforcement agencies who are considering predictive analytics. I think it's an unreasonable expectation that we have of government. Like we can't ask our politicians to also be data scientists, right? Some snake oil salesman shows up at the Massachusetts state legislature and says, "Oh, I got a thing that's going to save you so much money, and it's going to be so efficient, and it's going to eliminate the bias of bad racist individuals in the system." Any politician would be like, "Yeah, that sounds great. Give me that thing." They have no idea what to expect in terms of fairness, accountability, or transparency, or reporting mechanisms, or any of that. And we find all those things missing in the procurement of some of these tools that have done serious harm to people in society. And I think procurement is such an interesting idea because it offers a very tangible resource to a policymaker who can look at this tool now and say, "Oh, great, well, here's this resource that I have from all kinds of AI scientists and from civil society to say that a predictive tool should have this definition of fairness built in, and you should have to, I need a human being within your company who's responsible for coming back here once a quarter to report on the following metrics." That literally doesn't exist right now. You have people like the Department for Homeland Security in the States going out, this extreme vetting initiative, have people heard of that? They put out this RFP for a tool, let me know if I'm describing this wrong. They put out this RFP for a tool that would algorithmically make decisions about whether or not someone should be allowed to come into the country. It's like trying to predict whether or not someone is a good person or not. That's just, we cannot do that. We should not do that. And there's no transparency in the procurement process for who even responded to that RFP, what tool it was that they might build, who's auditing it, how they're defining what it means to be a good person. It's some other bizarre phrase. And so yeah, I'm with you that there's so much potential for these tools to be a mechanism for eliminating bias and bad actors within the system. The absence, very increasingly well-researched definitions of what it means for these tools to be fair and accountable and transparent. We just don't know that, and that's where I think we need to get to, and I'm really obsessed with procurement as a way to do that, so we'll see what I can get done and might have done.
Thank you, Tony. I have got a couple more questions, but given that we're getting close to 8 o'clock, I thought I might open it up to the room and see if there are any questions in the room. Put your hand up if you have something. Okay. Okay, a few tentative hands. I think we'll take 2 or 3 and decide. These guys can decide what seems the easiest to answer. We've got some mics. We'll start with Catherine. We'll come here. And then there's another one here. Could you say who you are and what organisation you're from?
Hello, I'm Catherine from the British Science Association. We're a charity that wants to see science as a more fundamental part of culture. I think one of the things that I've experienced is that one of the hallmarks around debates on public acceptance of new technology, the backlashes seem to occur most often when it's seen that the values of the people producing the technology or researching the stuff, those values don't match the values that the rest of us have. And I think that was most prominent in the public debates 20 or so years ago on GMOs, but I see it recurring in other debates about new technologies. How can we ensure that that doesn't trip us up? How can we ensure that we build the right kind of values into AI?
Yeah, hi, my name is Maggie Dupree, and I'm a founder of a global community called the League of Intrapreneurs, so people inside some of these institutions you're referencing, these large corporations working on innovation for good. And I guess I have 2 questions. You talked, Brittany, particularly about the fora for debate and DeepMind creating a lecture series and what have you. And so my question is, what are the appropriate fora? Are our institutions equipped to have these conversations? What more is needed? related question just feels like, so I worked a lot on sustainability and environmental issues, so you could kind of see the parallels in terms of accountability, transparency, standards and frameworks. Do we have the talent pool to be able to develop what you're talking about in order to make these decisions and hold our institutions accountable? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And there was one more here.
Hey, I'm Charlotte from Equal Education, and I wanted to speak to Whitney. You mentioned procurement and using predictor models, and I wanted to know kind of like, it's a scary concept and you like kind of dystopian, the kind of models that you're talking about. What would you, I guess, suggest, hope for as being the first steps in using these models into kind of like making more fair, kind of unbiased procurement efforts for government?
Okay, we'll take those three. Brittany, see you first.
Yeah. I have to write things down, otherwise I just. Great. So Catherine's question. Right. This values mismatch is something I think about all the time, because we don't actually agree what our values are. Even within this room, there's probably like a general political lean in a particular direction, but I think when it comes to some of these questions that are falling really into a gray area, again, I think criminal justice is a really good example of a scenario in which the application of technology could be for good. It could be to eliminate bias in that system, but it also could massively exacerbate bias in that system, not because some individual data scientist is a racist, but because they just didn't, maybe it's because they actually just didn't study critical race theory, you know? We ask a lot of the people, who work across the system. But this is part of the reason why I think, so for example, one of the things that we're trying, again, everything that we're trying to do is like, just, like we have a few people on our team who like, we'll just try something. We have this project with the RSA around citizens' juries, and the idea is that you would get a random sample of, maybe it will be like 30 people in a room, and you put like issue experts in the room, and you have the citizens like genuinely debate an issue. Because I'm really not convinced that we are on the same page about what are the values in relation to the way that we're applying the technology. And so we're trying this concept of like a citizens jury as a way to tease out what some of those values are. But you're absolutely right that we are not aligned there. And it's especially worrying because all of the people building these kinds of tools are white dudes. Like, I would say like pretty young white dudes who live in America and probably all vote Democratic, like for example. And that's hugely problematic. That's not okay. It worries me constantly. And we have diversity challenges at DeepMind as well. It's not a very diverse company. We're not alone in that in tech. And it's almost like we sort of like woke up and we're like, wait a second, like this is really not okay. We can't claim to build, you know, the most powerful technology that humanity's ever seen, and then have like the least representative company ever of people building it. So I feel really worried about that, and I don't have a lot of positive things to say. But this values mismatch is, I think, something that we all have to like really think about, and think about what it means to what actually are our values and how do they affect the way that we individually use the technology. Because you as a user have a vote. If you stop using technology that doesn't match your values and you stop giving your money to companies you don't like, then it will change. So I hope that's more positive. Should I answer the questions?
I suppose the thing I'd say about two things in response to that. One, the institutions that we have aren't set up. We've got the institutions that we rely on to regulate these things that do not exist in the way. At the very best, they might exist to be able to stop bad things happening, but even then, they're not very good at that either. They're certainly not in a place where they can think about how to use this for good things to happen. And I think that's the challenge. Governments are constantly catching up on this and are just behind the curve all the time. They don't understand the nature of the type of monopolies that might exist, the type of unintended consequences of using technology for different things. And I think that's a real challenge. And that's about all of the people in this room not blaming them for not knowing it, but actually working with them to try to find ways to do it. With the greatest respect, I'm not sure that the only forum that I want the ethics of AI to be discussed is by people who work in the AI industry. I might like a slightly broader perspective on that to kind of make it a bit more real. I think the question about change is one that is really, really important as well. All changes are people find difficult, whether it's new housing in their area, let alone that they lose their job to some scary little robot at the back of the thing. Whatever that is terrifying to people, and unless you explain why it's happening, you take them on that journey, you try to give them some benefits from it, then you will always have resistance to that, and it's up to all of us and to the others to really understand. And we also have to find good in this. At the moment, it is hard, particularly if you're particularly part of the income spectrum, it's hard to see what that technology does good for you at the moment. It really is hard to see what benefit you get from it. So I think there's a real job to start to be able to either, if there is good to come from it, draw that out and talk about it and explain it in a way that isn't just terrifying.
I don't want to be like a boring panelist, but I do agree with that. And what we just had this conversation at work around needing to do, like urgently do more work on articulating what is the benefit of all this technology. If it poses all this risk, then why do it? Why, like just for the sake of academic curiosity is not good enough. If it will genuinely, if there are knock-on effects that genuinely hurt people and exacerbate harm in society, then we need a better answer for why we are doing it at all. And I don't have that, and I'm sorry for raising it. But it does, we talked about it partly in relation to assistance. Like if I were to ask a random person off the street what is artificial intelligence, they might say, like the definition posed by the Royal Society in their machine learning report, but they also might say, I don't know, my Alexa thing. And it's like that, no, like surely this technology is capable of doing more for you than changing the song when you're in the shower. And surely like only a certain kind of person like me and maybe a lot of you can even afford that technology. We have to have a better answer to that question of who is benefiting from this and what is that benefit, and how can we measure it and how can we make sure it's evenly distributed in society. I am depressed to think that the best answer that we have to that right now is about personal convenience, which by the way is highly gendered. A lot of those assistants are women, and that's really messed up. Although I suppose you could change it to a man, and you can change the accent that it has, but that's still, I mean, the default is probably like, oh, it's probably a woman. I mean, surely you guys have thought about that's weird, right? That a woman is the one who's helping you, like, send your email and helping you do things honestly you really don't need help with. You really don't. So I think I kind of answered this question about the talent pool, that it really, really is not diverse, and I think that that's a really urgent problem and it's really scary. And there's been some really interesting reporting on sort of this competitiveness between industry companies and sort of brain drain out of academia into industry, and that worries people a lot too, and that's why the government is trying to do more to fund masters in machine learning, and especially fund conversion courses from other disciplines into machine learning. That's another sort of way to diversify the field and to increase the talent pool, and to maintain like British competitiveness in this space. Because people will just go to the States, or quite frankly go to Canada. Canada spends a lot of money on AI research. And so that's where sort of like from a government perspective they're approaching it. But I am consistently disappointed by how few mechanisms there are for transparency, even in that master's conversion conversation. If, for example, in order to convert my history degree, which there are a lot more women studying history than math still, unfortunately, if in order to convert my history degree into a machine learning master's, you require maths courses that just literally were never available in my postcode. My school literally did not teach those classes. That's still broken. That's still broken. And I don't think that our universities are doing enough to address that, to offer those kinds of courses that just are literally not available to the kind of people who need to be studying and participating in these fields. And on your first question, Maggie? I was going to say the fora for debate. Our institutions are super broken. I think people get into this habit of, sorry, I'm going on. People get into this habit of doing their own institutional thing. They stay in their lane. They're like, I'm a regulator, and I'm going to regulate, and I'm going to write things down, I'm going to enforce them. And I'm civil society, and I'm going to be radical and hold everybody to account. Sorry, civil society, that wasn't very generous. And I'm industry, and I'm just going to do whatever I want, spend a bunch of money on products that don't really matter. People have got to stop doing this boring institutional thing that they do where they're like, oh, I'm just doing my job and I'm doing my lane and I'm not talking to anybody except for other people like me. That's just not going to work anymore. We've got to think outside of our institutional boxes, which is why as an industry, as a company, as a part of the industry, as a big tech company, as a rich tech company, we're trying to focus on doing things that you wouldn't expect to hear from a company. Expanding the capacity of others, giving money away, funding research that can be truly, genuinely independent, to try to encourage thinking that is outside of these institutional silos that we keep ourselves in, because it's safe, and yeah, that's it.
Great, thank you. Another round of questions?
There was a question about the first step to, I can't read my handwriting.
Changing models around procurement, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, in terms of the procurement piece, there are some activists and academics in the States who have written open letters directed at state legislatures to articulate principles that can be translated into procurement standards. But if your question was actually about the technology itself, how can we make sure that that technology is actually applied for good, and not for the dystopian inevitability, I think we have to have a sort of ethical race to the top, and maybe that's only possible through radical transparency. If you expose these snake oil companies for what they are, and I think civil society and academia can best do that, then maybe it will become the case where government actually is no, I want the most ethical company, and then it becomes competitive to do the right thing. It becomes competitive to be transparent, and to be having held yourself to account and having course corrected when there was bias in your algorithm. That is super optimistic. That's potentially where you could get to.
Okay, lovely.
Can I just say that I've just had my whole life's worldview described finally to me, dystopian inevitability. And that is literally how I viewed my whole life, so thank you for that. Finally I can get that badge made. I'm a dystopian inevitabilist. Thank you, that's great.
Yes. On there. We've got any more set of particles? You have one. So that one. And another one. Another one's making the three. Click. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lucas at the Koreo Futures thing, so I'm incredibly out of my depth there. You spoke about how the pace of this technology is moving on incredibly quickly, and we need maybe a bit of time or a break in it almost as a society to tackle how we're going to deal with this technology. I wonder what you think is actually driving on this technology's growth so fast, and how practically we might get that time to actually talk about how we're going to use it.
Great.
Thinking historically, back in the Industrial Revolution, the poor made progress by a combination of good education and association, trade unions, credit unions, all of that. What would be the equivalent for the poor in this revolution?
Just taking it back a step and looking at choice and our own agency, how can we as individuals shape this future and make it utopia rather than an inevitable dystopia? What are your 3 take-home tips?
3 take-home tips for a utopia. Good question, Kevin. Thank you. 3 really good questions. Take them in whatever order you like. Gav, will you first?
So I'm going to start. It is impossible for society to take breaks. It's just not possible. It's not possible for us to do that. But at the same time, we have people shooting cars out past Mars for a gag. So white, rich, billionaire men, American. As it happens, funny that, isn't it? How that works. So I don't think we can take a break from it. But we can use the levers of power that exist, the regulations that exist, the people that exist. We can act as part of the takeover, as acting as consumers. We can choose you to do or not to do. We can choose to buy or not to buy. We can act in different ways. We have to collectivize, I absolutely agree, but we have to collectivize in different ways. Some of them are the same ways. There is absolutely a disconnect in our current workplace where generally those who have control of the labour have more power in companies and workplaces than those that are the labour themselves, and that is generally increasing across most societies, and in most cases that is bad for the worker and good for the bosses. It's not as simple as that. So we do need to collectivise. We have to use in some ways the technology. What many of the Industrial Revolution, what they did was the trade unions used the skills and things that the bosses had. They created their own schools. They created Ruskin College at Oxford. They took them on at their own game. So those of who are funders, those of us who have money, those who want to do this have to fund things that are different, that break that monopoly, that take on those monopolies, that give voices to those people who do that. So we have a responsibility as funders and actors in that game to do that. I think that the final point is we have to really decide what is important in this debate. There is so much that, shooting a car into space, whatever's, millions of people getting screwed over by 0-hour contracts and not having, and dying on the job because they're too scared to go to a hospital appointment because they don't want to lose their job. There are kind of things here that we need to decide what's important and what isn't about the world of work that's changing, and then we have to focus on them, and then we have to really, really work on those. There is that fundamental thing that we, as a society, we are drifting further and further and further around to the concept where we have to live to work. We have to take this opportunity to move back to something where we work to live, and we have to use that technology, all of us, and think how we make that technology help us make that shift. Otherwise, we are in a dystopian inevitability which will drive all of us further and further and further into more and more work and never stopping work because the technology allows us to do that. And that's got to be wrong.
Yeah, I think for the question on what's driving this sort of pace of technology, it's money. It's when people are making enormous sums of wealth from this technology.
A very small number.
A very small number of people, which again is that it shouldn't be. It's not surprising to anybody in the room, right? Like that is our thing. We're not good at evenly distributing wealth throughout society, or evenly distributing the benefit from technology in society. I think that's all driven by money, and to say something more positive, that could potentially be changed if the incentive structures for companies working in this space were changed. And that's like obviously much, much harder, much bigger bet, but I think that would be that's like a root cause rather than like addressing a symptom of like a potential misuse of AI. I think is a symptom, whereas like addressing the fact that the incentive structures that are driving the creation of companies that can assume massive amounts of wealth, or the incentive structures that make that possible and that drive bad decision making within those companies is all about money. And so yeah, if there was some other way for us to be successful, then that would be great. I don't have the answer to that. On the question about the Industrial Revolution, I'm interested to think more about whether the exact same points are going to be useful this time around. People have to learn. People have to pay attention to what is happening to them, and the things that they contribute to all of these potential misuses of AI. Although I think there's a really interesting, so I was going to say learn and organize, shout when you see that things are wrong, like all of those things I think that have made sense in the past and that have been good organizing tactics are going to make sense again. And I think part of what I was pausing to think about is like what some of the challenges of that are going to be. It's going to be this sort of like feeling that there's like a faceless conglomerate that you're up against and you don't know who it is. But like you as the user, you vote when you use a product. Like these products don't work without you. And if you are not comfortable, if you read terms of service, like read terms of service, use data portability, like really actively participate with you and your use of technology, and it's not just something that's happening to you, you participate in this. And I think people have to really, really like take the reins of that and demand better and spend your dollars, which is all your data, in places that you feel more confident and that you feel where the kind of transparency and accountability mechanisms are in place that make you happy. And that's really ambitious though. I mean, let's all be real. We all really, really, really like to use Gmail, but I do encourage you to read the terms of service. They make them more user-friendly maybe. On the utopia question, how to create it, I genuinely don't. I genuinely don't know. Like, I'm struggling to think of especially like as a person of color, like I'm struggling to think of what a utopia would even look like. What we're asking from this technology is not something that we've ever done before. And I'm sorry I keep coming back to that point, but we're sort of demanding things like radical transparency and fairness in a way that never existed in society before. And so it's hard for me to think like what a positive vision for like a perfect utopia would be. I'm not even sure that we would want that, right? Like I don't know if that's possible. Maybe there's like some like radical social theorist in the room who can argue me down on that. But I don't know if it's possible, and I don't know if it's something that we want. I'm really, for now, I'm really, really motivated by questions of power and access. Who is making these decisions? Who is building this technology? Who is in this room? Who is being cut out? Who is taking up too much space and there isn't space for anyone else? I think about this a lot in relation to DeepMind actually, because we get a lot of speaking invitations that I think should be given to other people. And so I'm constantly saying no to things. I mean, Ned is like a friend of a friend, so it's fine.
That's the only reason.
But like I'm constantly saying no to things and suggesting other, especially women from civil society instead. Because I think that the default is to always say, well, what does the big tech company think about this? No, ask someone else. Ask someone from a privacy group, a civil rights group instead. Those are the people that I think should have more spaces in these conversations, and that can get us toward more utopic vision for what some of these bigger societal questions could look like. I hope that's helpful.
Very good, thank you. On that kind of desire for utopia, I think we'll probably finish, so you can get on just before we close. Before I introduce Rachel, I'm just going to say a few final words. Just want to say a huge thank you to Cameron and Brittany for coming this evening and for listening. I was just going to say that Indy's video is actually 8-9 minutes long. And I think in the interest of kind of bringing this to a close, I'm going to share it after the event rather than showing it now. I'm sure you'll find it super interesting, so I'll make sure I get permission to do that and I'll send it around. Thank you. We have a mic for Rachel up here. Should have this photo.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for a gorgeous discussion. I was hooked on every word. I love the words from John Whitmore, if you know them, who says the conversation isn't about the work, the conversation is the work. And I think we've just witnessed a really beautiful and important conversation and discourse that gives us plenty to take away. And just a couple of things to confess that I'm taking away. One is I'm kind of struck by what are the opportunities here for us to genuinely tackle something that I think a lot of us in the room really care about, which is addressing the radical inequality we have in this country in terms of access to opportunity. You know, within these riches, how can we explore automation and the future of work that genuinely changes and makes more equal access to opportunity? And secondly, what would be the most beautiful intersection between the human and the automated context? And so I'm going to kind of go away and think about both of those. I think I know most of the people in the room. For those of you I don't know, my name's Rachel Whale, and I'm CEO and founder of Koreo.
it is a privilege, Campbell, to work on this work. And when I was a kid and I hadn't been outside of my postcode and I'd never heard of university, I never in a million years thought I'd be in a room like this. And I really think it's important for all of us to remember what a privilege it is to even be in this conversation, actually, when the vast majority of the world are not in work and will never be in work. And then maybe some more might be in work, but it's terrible work and in work poverty. And then maybe a few that are just getting through the drudgery. And then we're this like tiny, tiny minority that get to be in these spaces and have this conversation. So I feel really, really grateful for that. And gatherings like tonight remind me that we have a shared endeavour. So actually, Brittany, I think we are trying to get out of our lanes. That this is a wide network of people that I think have something in common. I think you're supporting us at Koreo with our mission. So we have a mission by 2030, it's a tiny one, to redefine the notion of work. Okay? So that positive social impact is part of everybody's day job, regardless of role, job title, sector or industry, because that's the way we believe we can most powerfully mobilise people to create the change. We believe people, human beings, talent, will be the fundamental force that changes the world, and that collaborative action is the only way to do it. I'm hinting at my optimism, Campbell, so brace yourself, because there is more coming in your direction. All of our work is based on those beliefs, okay? All of our work. And actually tonight, many of you are here through our consultancy projects, whether that's with Care International or Friends from Mind or Unilever. Many of you are here through our fabulous Charity Works graduate programme that places hundreds and hundreds of amazingly talented young people into our charity sector in the UK. And they really need great talent because they're tackling really complex social issues. Many of you are here from our Change 100 disability programme, which we run in partnership with the fabulous Leonard Cheshire Disability, where we're trying to change the employment prospects for disabled young people and diversify workforces at the same time. And I was at an assessment centre this morning, and I met so many people who bring an essential human quality to the workplace because of the barriers they've had to overcome, and they bring that beautiful resilience, Augusto, yes? You know what I'm talking about? That wonderful resilience. They don't even know they've got it. They've overcome so many barriers already, and as an employer, you're kind of hungry for that energy and talent to come into the room. Some of you are here from our Good Women's Network. It's open to men as well, but we believe in the power of women to change the world, and we're going to carry on doing that. And welcome to everyone that's here from our Koreo Prize. Our inaugural year was 2017. We had about 1,000 young people enter our storytelling competition to bring a fresh perspective to help us embed the UN Sustainable Development Goals in a UK context. And our wonderful winner took away £5,000 to take her work onwards and forwards and create real change, actually, in the context of honour-based violence in an SDG context. So I'm really proud of that. And some of you are here joining us on kind of new pieces. So some of you are here from 10 Years Time and Reclaim, because we've just been down from Big Lottery, our supporters, and Esme Fairburn. So we're going to try and do something over the next 10 years to diversify the talent mix in the foundations and trust sector in the UK, because that's a really important part of the power system to create social change in the UK, and it is predominantly run by white, older, middle-class men. And I'm sure there's some fantastic people in that group doing great work, but we really want to mix that up and diversify it, just like Deep Mind want to do, I'm sure. So we're gonna do our best to find talented people from working class backgrounds and start talking about class in the UK in a diversity context for the first time, which that feels kind of like important, but I haven't done that before, so that's kind of like a new road. But over 10 years, we want to get as many people as possible into those foundations and trusts from a lived experience point of view in terms of working class backgrounds, kind of change those organisations. So we're doing some new pieces this year. We're going to be collaborating with some large-scale employers, hopefully like Digitas LBI, to bring the SDG agenda into their approach to how they develop people, because you're absolutely right. If a company like this decides to get really serious about gender equality, we won't have all of our PA systems at home named after women. That's going to change, right? So the opportunity to make that shift feels pretty gorgeous. I do feel quite optimistic for the future, and I've just put two thoughts out into the room. One is, I do genuinely believe that in the context of automation, we will see the emergence of a new kind of employer. And I would describe that employer as a humanitarian. I think it's a beautiful word. Humanitarian employer, humanitarian leadership. What do I mean by that? I mean two things. I mean an employer who genuinely embraces its role towards building a better society. And secondly, an employer that in the context of increasing automation places a heartfelt value on the human, the essential human characteristics we bring into the workplace. And they are many and special, you know, our curiosity, our compassion. So I really do think by 2030 we will see a new type of employer emerging in that humanitarian space, and that's partly because the business case for this kind of social change has happened. We don't need to make that case anymore. And secondly, the idea I put into the room that I took from an inspiring woman, Kate Rayworth's work on donut economics. I don't know if people are familiar with that, but she invites all of us to think as 21st century economists, and she invites us all to think about applying the principle of distributive by design into our work. And it's a beautifully simple concept, which means when we're thinking about our work, designing our work and delivering our work, how can we do that in a way that generates the maximum benefits for the people we care about and the people that could benefit the most from our work. And actually, once you start thinking along those lines, it's not that difficult to do at all, actually. So I'll leave you with those two thoughts. I am a deep optimist for the future, but I love the challenge of us stepping up our game and combining our efforts to create more collective impact. I would, if anybody would like to explore how we could collaborate and work together more, find out more about our work and just come and talk to us, I would like to take this moment to say some thank yous, if that's okay. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you to Lorenzo and Fern and Anna and the whole team at Digitas LBI. Their generosity and hospitality continues to just amaze me. They give us this whole space for free, and they've done it on so many occasions. So we're very, very grateful for that. I'd like to thank Preloaded. Hattie is in the room, if she'd just like to say hi. Where is she? She's somewhere. There she is at the back. Preloaded have brought, again, pro bono, all of the VR equipment in the room tonight, and I hope you had a chance to experiment with it. When I started out in mental health services back in the early 90s, it seemed radical to put some headphones on, and if you were trying to understand paranoid schizophrenia, here's some voices. Now we can immerse ourselves and literally step into the shoes of people experiencing autism and dementia and conditions that we don't have solutions to. And that human empathy is something that I think should always stay within our work. Hattie's available to talk to any of you that would be interested in finding out more about their work, Games for Social Purpose, and how it could kind of add value to your work. I'd like to thank London Robotics, who brought Pepper and Paro. I felt comforted. I think there's a solution there for loneliness. You know, I'm up for it. It doesn't need to be another human being sat chatting to me. I think there's a real opportunity there to get a different level of connection, but that was interesting. Thank you very much. Watch the video Ned shared. I think it's controversial and interesting. I'd like to, in terms of applying the principle of distributive by design, we're not a complex company, we're a small company dedicated to social change, but we could make a decision that through any social event, we do a lot actually, we'd make sure that anybody we're working with brings that kind of social purpose into the heart of their work. And I'd like to introduce you to Sophie, who's somewhere in the room. Where's Sophie? She's probably in the kitchen actually. Sophie is a very, very talented young woman from France who came to London and wanted to do something. So she decided to set up Alicia. She collects waste food from local producers in London every day, and she recycles that to create a banquet. So all of our canapes tonight came from waste food out-of-date food, ugly food. I'm putting you off now. It's beautiful though, wasn't it? It was fantastic. So I'd encourage you all to kind of buy her in and give her more business, because it's a really worthwhile piece to do. Ned's already thanked our panellists, but I'd like to thank them again, because their intelligence and experience and perspectives can only stimulate and challenge us to think further. I would like to say a huge thank you to my amazing team at Koreo, a very young, talented, dedicated team of people who've made all of this happen. And in particular, I'd like to thank Ned. Koreo Futures was his concept right from the very beginning. He's curated everything that's led up to today. And over the course of the next few months, we'll be releasing 5 provocations along the themes that he's already described. He's already shared with you the overview and introduction to the piece. An amazingly talented guy that has brought this whole piece together. So well done, Ned, and thank you. And obviously, finally, I'd like to thank you all for coming into the room tonight. I see you all as progressive leaders, actually, in your own right, in whatever space you're in. And what I mean by that is I think everybody here tonight, wherever they've come from, brings a hope that the world could be better, a genuine kind of heartfelt belief in that, and a commitment and a curiosity about how we can not just change things, but change the way change happens. And some of the challenges that Brittany and Campbell have put into the room tonight really asks us to raise our game about how we change the way change happens. I'd like to hold on to the idea of how we keep the lived experience and the user experience at the heart of how that change story happens, because that's where the authenticity and the really human story comes from. So thank you to everyone for being here tonight. We will be releasing the first provocation on the rising status of social care next week, so watch out for that in your inbox. We're free to stay in the space. There's plenty more wine and gorgeous food from Alicia, so please feel free to stay, linger, but most importantly, please carry on these conversations and these thoughts, and we'll see what we can do. Thank you very much.